Robin Flynn filling in for Elias Makos today. Trudy Mason will fill in for the rest of the week, but you got me till noon. Well, QP Air Canada have reached a tentative agreement this morning. The question remains, were these flight attendant strikes even legal? There was back-to-work legislation issued by the federal government, and the flight attendants and the union said, no, we're going to continue to strike. Thousands of passengers worldwide were impacted by these protests, and despite that back-to-work order, binding arbitration threats, the flight attendants refused to go back to work. Well, it seemed to work out for them, but was it legal? What does this mean for other unions who may be protesting in the future? Is it normal for the government to get involved with worker strikes? Joining us now is Stephen Tufts, Associate Professor of Labor Geography at York University. Hi, Professor Tufts. How are you?
Good morning.
Now, a lot of conversation is being had about the legality of these strikes, and I was cautioned to not use words like illegal, that perhaps unlawful was more appropriate. I don't even know what the difference is at this point.
Well, there's a couple of things to unpack here. First of all, the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, after they follow the directive of Section 107 by the minister to order the workers back to work and send things to binding arbitration. And the workers refused to do that. And then they did claim that the work stoppage or the strike was then illegal. However, at the same time, there are court challenges going ahead against the use of Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code in this way. The unions have court challenges ongoing, and QP is probably going to challenge the way it was used in this case as well. So the question is it an illegal strike if the way that strike was deemed illegal was a violation of charter rights? So it gets very complicated. And I think that's where we are at this moment. But what the flight attendants actually demonstrated, it doesn't matter if a strike's deemed illegal or not. If people don't go back to work, there's a lot. The law doesn't really matter. That's how we put it simply. And labor rights have been fought for over decades and centuries now by people breaking the law. And flight attendants, when they said enough is enough, you're intervening on our right to freely bargain with our employer, we're not going to go back to work. And that was what created the chaos over the last few days.
How much of the fact that the public seemed to be largely on the flight attendants' side impacted how quickly they got a deal done after the flight attendants ignored that federal order?
I think it was a big factor. Let's put this into perspective. Flight attendants are coming off a 10-year agreement. They know that this is a big round of bargaining. It's almost a generational round of bargaining. They start their Unfair Canada campaign talking about unpaid time and ground pay that needs to be compensated for months, if not years, ahead of this round of bargaining leading up to it. Canadians actually listened to it. They actually used common sense and said, you know what, this isn't fair. People should be able to be compensated for their time of work. There's a lot of delays in the airline industry, which means that their flight attendants might only have a 90-minute flight from Toronto to Montreal, but if they're on the tarmac for 5 hours, is it fair they only get paid for 2? And that's something that I think resonated with even those Canadians who were caught up trying to get home from Vancouver to Montreal.
Yeah, I myself was caught up in it. I barely got out of Newfoundland on Friday. Several delays. It was difficult, but throughout it all, I 100% agree you should be paid for the time that you work. But I'm curious what this means for the airline industry, because Air Canada was not unique in only paying their attendants when the wheels were up. So what does this mean for the other airlines who I'm sure are watching this now freaking out?
Well, there's a couple of things here. Absolutely. QP does not only represent flight attendants at Air Canada. They represent flight attendants at WestJet and Air Transat. And now there's going to be what's called pattern set or pattern bargaining. Those gains that are made with the big carrier are going to filter down and they're going to be fought for at the smaller carriers. Now, one thing that might happen is that, and Minister Hughes has hinted at this, with her so-called probe into unpaid labor, which is really just a distraction. We know that this has been a problem for years, as she apparently only learned about this Friday, is that there may be a change to the Canada Labour Code, which just makes this practice illegal, and that would take it out of bargaining and just regulate it.
Wow, that's interesting because there are a lot of other industries besides flight attendants. Like when we were talking about this earlier today, I was getting text messages being like, I work tons of hours unpaid all
Yeah,
the time,
exactly.
and I'm like, well, you should get paid, man. Like, I don't know what else to tell
and
you.
this is something people are waking up to, right? That our work day is a lot longer than what we get paid for. And for all kinds of changes in the workplace. Think of how often you check your email that's work related when you're not on air and not working.
Oh, God.
These are things that we all do now. And it's something that as a society we're going to have to tackle moving forward. But in the interim, the flight attendants have also pushed back on this use of Section 107. And I think that's really important because I think the government's hit a wall with this tactic. And it may have run its course, and that's going to make it more difficult to intervene in the future.
So talk to me about Section 107 because people seemed surprised that the federal government intervened in this way in the first place. What is this section meant for?
Yeah, it's meant for really narrow circumstances when the government has to intervene in a work stoppage. The regular way that back to work legislation works is through Parliament. So at the very least, even though if the back to work legislation is passed very quickly, at least there's the debate. At least the law is tabled, it's read. Opposition parties get a chance to say if it's good or bad. That does it, but that takes longer. And it's really hard to do in a minority government. So what Trudeau started doing, and as well goes back beyond him as well, they started using this loophole and sort of this clause in the Canada Labour Code, which just allows the minister to direct the CIRB with really just some people say it's just by sending an email. And that's something that is probably been abused. And it's being challenged in courts as something that's been misused. But it takes a long time for that to be resolved in the courts. So by just pushing back and ending its practice, that's a faster way for workers to address this.
In conversation with Stephen Tufts, Associate Professor of Labor Geography at York University, what does this mean for the way unions as a whole across various industries will strike moving forward? Is it going to be more common for them to defy back to work orders?
Well, unions do historically defy back to work orders. In Ontario, we had educational assistants resist a back to work order a couple of years ago, and the government backed down and reached a deal. I think what you're going to see is a different tactic with this automatic assumption that workers will just obey directives to go back to work. That's no longer going to be in play by employers or the government. And they're going to be more careful when they invoke it because once workers just withdraw their labor from producing a good or service, you have to listen to them. That's where the power comes from. And I think that's what Air Canada learned this weekend.
Power in numbers, right? 10,000 flight attendants, not having them on the job.
Yes, 10,000 flight attendants that, again, voted 99.7% to go on strike. These were very angry workers who wanted to pay catch up after a 10-year agreement where they lost significant grounds and real wages.
Stephen Tufts, Associate Professor of Labor Geography at York University. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Robin.